It's one of the most pressing issues for U.S. President Joe Biden: what to do about Iran's nuclear program. After the previous Trump administration scrapped the deal Biden helped forge when he was vice president, Iran has gone ahead with enrichment activities. But in a gesture of goodwill, Tehran has made a mostly symbolic concession to the UN's nuclear watchdog. Ludovica Brignola has more.
The global energy watchdog has managed to avert a potential crisis, with Iran threatening to scupper negotiations to revive the 2015 nuclear deal. The country says it will allow the International Atomic Energy Agency to service the cameras at its nuclear site so it can continue to monitor the country's arms program. The agency's hold over Iran's nuclear landscape has loosened since 2018, when the US pulled out of the accord signed with Tehran and other Western powers. The agreement was originally designed to curb nuclear weapons development in exchange for sanctions relief. But when Donald Trump withdrew, the US doubled down on sanctions, imposing punitive measures on Iran's most critical industries, the oil and banking sectors. As a result, the country started reducing its commitment to the deal. 6 years ago, Iran agreed to limit uranium enrichment to a maximum 3.67%. Uranium enrichment is required to create nuclear fuel and weapons out of the mined mineral. After 2018, Iran said it increased enrichment levels to 4%, but after the assassination of lead scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh and an attack on the country's main nuclear facility earlier this year, allegedly at the hands of Israel, Tehran ramped up enrichment to 60%, its highest to date. It's still far from the level required to produce a nuclear weapon, which is 90%, but it's high enough to alarm the West, which is now more eager to bring Iran's nuclear program under control, a move Israel staunchly opposes. The Biden administration also would like to see Iran comply with the previous terms before Washington returns to the deal. Iran maintains its nuclear plans are peaceful and that they're reversible, but it recently appointed hardline diplomat Ali Bagheri Kani as the new deputy for political affairs. A staunch critic of the 2015 deal, Kani may become the country's new chief nuclear negotiator soon, an appointment that won't bode well for the resumption of talks. Ludovica Brignola, Straight Talk.
And to discuss what's at stake when it comes to Iran's nuclear program, joining me now from Istanbul is Murat Aslan. He is a faculty member at Sabahattin Zaim University. And from Istanbul, Borzou Daragahi, he is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you both. So, Borzou, Tehran has agreed to let the IAEA measure the progress of its nuclear program. Is that an important step forward?
Well, we should be careful about what they allowed. They allowed the, it was a very, very specific minor thing. They allowed the IAEA technicians to go into the facilities and allow for the maintenance, the regular maintenance that is replacing the batteries and the memory cards of the cameras that are installed there. What is under lock and seal is the actual memory cards. They're not going to be able to see them as part of what was agreed upon in terms of the additional safeguards agreement in the JCPOA in the nuclear deal in 2015 until such time as the US and world powers return to the full terms of the that 2015 nuclear deal as stipulated by a law passed by the Iranian parliament.
So Borzou is of the idea that it's maybe a minor move by the Tehran administration. But Murat, how has this last-minute deal with the nuclear agency helped Iran to stave off some diplomatic censure and saved already stalled talks from derailing further? I mean, was that a calculated move by Tehran?
Yes, absolutely, because Tehran is really evolved in terms of diplomacy, negotiations. And this is the first step after a few years. Then we should expect more in terms of having all parties come to the least terms. On the other hand, it will be a hard bargaining because what the US administration demand is to restart the negotiations from the ground zero maybe, and include other regional developments, maybe inclusion of Iran to Yemen or Gulf region or relations with Israel, then Iran says no. I think the course of the negotiations will be really fragile in the coming months or years, I don't know. And Iranian politicians seem stick to their original agenda because the current government in Iran is really decisive in terms of protecting the interests after the withdrawal of the Trump from the agreement.
So, Borzou, is there any significance to the replacement of Iran's longtime nuclear negotiator with Ali Bagheri Kahri, who is portrayed as a hardliner?
I mean, I don't think that there can be a lot of air between the stances of, let's say, the supreme leader in Iran, Ali Khamenei, and the nuclear negotiator. I don't think that there's going to be any huge differences. I think that what you will see, what we have seen in terms of how these sorts of diplomatic changes play out is a change in tone. Now let's take a look at during the presidency of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, you had a nuclear negotiator, Saeed Jalili, who barely spoke English. I don't think he even spoke English. And he would just sit there for hours hectoring the other participants in the talks rather than actually trying to negotiate. Now you have a new guy in there who is considered more hardline, and you might again have no big shifts in policy, but a change in tone that will make diplomacy more difficult.
Yeah, and we also know that he'd been part of Iran's nuclear negotiating team under Mahmoud Ahmadinejad from 2007 to 2013. So, Murat, now that the fresh round of negotiations aimed at reviving the 2015 nuclear deal are to be held soon, are there any prospects for a breakthrough?
Well, it depends on the perspectives of the parties because the Western Hemisphere perceive Iran as a challenger because they have a great program for delivery systems, say missiles or rockets, reaching out the far distances like the whole Europe. And in the meantime, Iran is very active in Syria, in Yemen, in Gulf region, and in Lebanon. So right after this negotiation, I think Western expectation and perception will be based on having a more passive Iran. But I don't see it as a probability because the latest election in Iran, this is my opinion, the second revolution, because conservative leadership just banned the candidacy of even conservative individuals, and they built up a government where it stick to the principles of the revolution. So in the coming period, I think it will be very hard to predict exactly what projections could be realized on the ground or what agendas will be in their pockets.
So, Borzou, why do you think the Western powers are putting pressure on Iran that the patience for the resumptions of talks is not indefinite? I mean, has Iran crossed the threshold for having enough material to fuel a nuclear weapon? What's the latest?
Well, I think those two. I think that for a large part of the view that time is running out, it's just the U.S. administration kind of trying to put some pressure on Iran, trying to get them back to the negotiating table. I don't think the European powers are kind of, let's be honest, kind of clueless on this, and they're just trying to take the American lead. They don't have a lot of diplomatic bandwidth at this point. I don't think the Americans have a lot of diplomatic bandwidth. They're just overwhelmed in Washington, in Brussels, in Berlin. There's so many crises now, and then this one. And you got to imagine the pressure that these guys are under to deal with this. So I think that there is a kind of drift about this issue. There's a lot of confusion. And, in some ways that is potentially dangerous. But I think that if you're Iran, you're looking at this situation and you're looking at the U.S. reluctance to even stay in Afghanistan and the possibility of real, actual military pressure must seem really far off at this point.
So, Murat, do you agree that the US's preoccupation with the Indo-Pacific region and countering China distracted Biden from addressing the Iranian nuclear issue?
Iran is really different in the perceptions of the Americans because Iran is relevant to the security of Israel. So whatever happens in Pacific Ocean or related with China, I think the US foreign policy will be based on securing Israel with the most opportunities and assets on the ground. And they will try to push hard to Iran to be more compliant with the terms that they impose. On the other hand, I think there must be something else to be concerned. It's the European interest, because there will be a contradiction, in my opinion, in the coming days, because Europeans perceive Iran as a market.
Yes.
They can sell products. And Iran's ultimate aim is to have all sanctions be lifted. So if you compare all aims and perceptions, I think Americans will be involved, but more focused on Israel's security and having Iran more pacified.
All right, gentlemen, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining us on Straight Talk.